Today I learned that there were at least 25 massacres of black people committed by mobs of white people in the United States between 1963 and 1943. Do schools in the US teach students about any of these? A Scandinavian. There is no central US school curriculum. Things vary massively between states and districts within states, so you will never get an actual answer to do American schools teach X? Other than some do, some don't. For example, I teach 7th grade history, and I definitely spend a long time reaching about native boarding schools and the decimation of native culturellos. But there are others in this thread who say that's never taught. I was taught that it happened in general, but not any specific incidents. There is no national curriculum. Even if there was a national curriculum, the purpose of curriculum isn't to dictate how a teacher teaches a class down to every fine detail, but to provide a standard so that, for example, arithmetic is taught, not specifically 22 equals 4. With 180 days of school a year, there isn't enough time in any class to cover everything in fine detail. My school didn't teach about any of them specifically. It was kinda like massacres and lynchings happened, anyways. It infuriates me that they still call the Tulsa Massacre a riot. I was in high school in the early 2000s and took US History and AP US History, the college credit class. None of this was mentioned. But then we did use textbooks made in Texas, so not surprising. The only place I can think of which seceded from two different countries, with their primary reason both times so they could keep enslaving black people. I grew up in Virginia. We did not hear about it. In fact, I didn't know about the Tulsa event until I was almost 60. Virginia was really bad. They sanitized everything. We had a Virginia history book. Happy slaves and all that. Robert E. Lee was a hero, etc. Sickening. But at least, after 400 years now, we are trying. Melted down the Lee statue, got rid of all of them. Or most. And we are now a blue state. Go figure. We will probably get bluer now that the orange dumbass is back. I don't remember being taught about this specifically, but do remember being taught about lynching as part of our large unit about the civil rights movement, and I think this sort of mob violence against blacks was mentioned alongside or lumped in with that. We definitely learned about, say, the KKK terrorizing black communities post-Civil War. Nope, and it's illegal to teach them in some US states. Republicans prefer their American history nice and whitewashed. They even downplay the role of slavery in the American economy, which blows my mind. I realize this is all a race bait, karma farm, but the honest answer is that individual instances with little to no national significance are hard to fit in a limited school curriculum. Yes, racism, antebellum, etc. are covered in schools. Are individual acts of evil covered? Typically not. Yes, not in detail on each one, but lynchings were discussed in school in the 80s. The argument that US history is whitewashed is BS. I learned all about that and slavery, the Trail of Tears and Japanese internment camps, etc. Nothing was hidden. Graduated HS in 1993 for reference. Lynching of all races was not uncommon for a period of time. Numbers I have seen were more than 300 blacks, and 300 whites were lynched. Raised in TN, and we learned about lynchings and some race riots. My high school taught them, but it was also a general outlier. The primary history government teacher was 40 years old and in a punk band, so he didn't sugarcoat anything. The school also offered classes specific to African American history and literature. There are tons of people who are just not taught this at all. The thing about the American school system is that it's very fragmented. Each states have different curriculum and the school districts themselves are ran by different cities or counties, so there isn't one definitive answer. Historically, all US schools have had extensive curriculum about slavery, segregation, the civil rights movement, racially motivated violence, etc. More recently in the Trump era, southern states have really regressed in this. Several states, namely the ones where these massacres were most common, have started to whitewash their curriculum and have removed most of the teaching about racism. They are sadly conditioning a lot of children to be very skeptical of any claims of racial inequity. Not really. They teach and focus on the Holocaust more than they do anything regarding black people. I live in one of the most progressive places in the United States, and my APS history class didn't go over this. We actually completely skipped the portion of the book about black people in America during that time period. I was the only person in the class to speak up about it being wrong to do so. Thanks, Mr. Fleshman. They do, yes, but not in the way you just did. They taught us that any black person who wouldn't admit to the Klan or the community would be lynched. 2 or 3 books in English literature go in depth to some of these unlawful scenarios as well. e.g. To Kill a Mockingbird. The history of Black Wall Street and its demise was covered up for more than a century until its 100-year anniversary. I guarantee you no school in America taught anyone about that short of growing up in the town and having your great-grandparents survive. Honestly, when I was at school in the late 60s and early 70s, apparently, absolutely nothing occurred after the Civil War in the United States. I believe the world stopped having newsworthy events after the beginning of Roman times. There was something on Marco Polo, but it wasn't on the test. Individual states have their own education programs. I'm in California, a politically left state compared to other states. Our curriculum on the Civil War and related issues about racial discrimination are much more complete than in other states. I imagine that some regions of the US will teach this information, but it wouldn't surprise me if some regions don't discuss it at all, or they misrepresent the situation. For example, a textbook might say blacks were often lynched after being accused of assault while ignoring that the actual crime was talking with a white woman, then having her brother get angry and falsely accuse the black man of assault because talking with a black man was disgraceful. Me was a school teacher 30 years ago. For most of my life, I thought things were pretty much the same across the country. The more I have learned in the last 10 years, the worse I realize things really are. Most people who are aware of them only became aware of them when one was shown in the HBO Watchmen series, which came out in 2019, and conservative school districts generally try and restrict teaching about them. So, no, they are not taught. There's a lot of white people who were around during the civil rights movement who never gave up opposing it. I think people forget that. The villains of history don't stop existing when the textbook enters a new chapter. They enter politics and run for local offices.